What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Life Coach Zach podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Chad Beauchamp, doctor in physical therapy, really good friend of mine, actually, one of the leaders that was on the Hello Wellness retreat in Bali. We got to know each other really, really well. We had a ton in common between personal growth, ultra wellness, vitality, just living our best lives, stepping into the greatest version of ourselves each and every single day. It's a pleasure. Dr. Chad, how you doing today?
I am doing very well. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate the introduction. And yeah, we met at Hello Wellness, which was a great experience. And maybe we'll get a chance to dive into that a little bit today, too.
Absolutely. So first of all, how was Bali for you? Did you have a good time?
Bali was awesome. I think, I've done some other retreats in the past, and I think Hello Wellness has a very unique take on wellness retreats in general. And I think they're really onto something that it allows a lot of people to tap into the spiritual realm, but also just having really good balance in your life in general.
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah, I had a good time too. And while we were there, just so everyone knows, I had Dr. Chad perform a chakra opening, chakra balancing session on me, a little bit of Reiki as well. And there's a lot of breath work that was involved. It was an incredible session. And so, Dr. Chad, tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about the session, what your intentions were, and what I received from that session.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my background is I'm a doctor of physical therapy, very Western trained as far as medicine. My more recently, the last 6 years, I've taken a lot of time studying Eastern medicine, which heavily involves spirituality, energy medicine, energy clearing, so on and so forth, inner child work. And so, what I have kind of created on my own with taking all this, the Western and the Eastern side, into my thought process is exactly what you mentioned. It is opening the energy channels, which are called chakras. Our bodies have what are called meridians. Meridians are basically highways that run through our body. That's how our energy channels, move the energy around our body. So our chakras, think of as our energy generators, our powerhouses. There's 7 different ones, and then off of those we have our meridians, which helps that energy move through the body. So my take on it's a type of Reiki, but I'm also mixing in actual sports massage with it. And so the first half of the treatment, I'm really first analyzing the chakras, see which ones are blocked, which ones are maybe too open, which ones are maybe a little bit more stagnant. And then from there, I'm opening those up via the different practices of sports massage, Reiki. And then the second half of it, we dive into more a breath of fireworks. So once the chakras are open, having the client do some pretty intense breathing technique, and that helps kind of flush out those energy systems and really ramps up the use of them. So basically, think of it as one, cleaning out the car, the engine, and then 2, putting some really high grade oil or fuel into it and getting it revved up to work at a little bit higher level, more efficient.
Absolutely. It's awesome because that brings a whole nother dynamic to the mind body connection. This is like the mind body and spirit connection, right? We have our mental health, we have our physical health, and then we have our energetic or spiritual health. And these kind of go hand in hand. And, some of the things that, some feedback after the session, I was so calm. I was so at peace. I didn't really have any words. I mean, no words articulated eloquently enough can do what you performed on me justice, because the effects of these types of practices, whether it's meditation, whether it's Reiki healing, whether it's any of the stuff that we did with breath work and mindfulness, the results are cumulative. It's not linear. You don't get the impacts and results from what you did. It lasts for in perpetuity. So consistently building on these practices. So I'm going to ask you a question for me.
Yep.
What are some other things that I can do in my daily life to consistently build upon and prevent my chakras from being closed and making sure the energy is running through the meridians in my body as smoothly and as efficiently as possible?
Yeah. Great question, and I get asked this a lot, with patients, friends, family. It's just like any athlete, that wants to perform at a higher level. and especially if they're injured. It's not just we work with a lot of high level athletes. It's not just they want to be healed from their injury, but they want to know, how can I, one, prevent injury, but also operate at a higher level, right? So from there, what we're doing is using that practice, one, to clear out some of the stagnant energy, open up some of those channels that got blocked. Now, what can you do on a regular basis is taking care of your vehicle. And I often use the body, as it's a vehicle, right? We are living within this vehicle. How can we make the vehicle more protected or run more efficiently? There's a lot of different ways. One is getting treatment, as I provided for you. But as far as your own practice, is really what's trying to connect with your subconscious mind, is the way I go through it, or your inner child. Ways of doing that is through meditation, calming the mind, connecting with your inner self. You can do that through breath work. You can do that through Reiki. You can do that through acupuncture. There's a lot of different practices that help you connect with that inner self. Yeah. As far as protection, we have a lot of different ways of protecting ourselves. So again, going back to the high level athlete, how does a high level athlete protect themselves from being hurt? We often think about, building up muscle, building up strength, having a high level skill set that allows them to avoid issues, right? Same way with the energy body, we can build up protection by taking care of our vehicle, putting really good nutrition in our body so the body operates at a high level. When we don't put good nutrition in, one, we don't have a great fuel source for it to operate on, but also we end up building fat. We lower our metabolism. And through this process, our body then has to work harder in order to stay, quote unquote, healthy. That's typically where, you know, issues come in, whether it's a sickness, whether it's cancer, an autoimmune disease. Often depression and anxiety can step in at those times because of the chemical imbalances that we have in the body. So, a way of protecting the body, proper nutrition. There's also ways of protecting the energy fields, right? When our chakra system gets bogged down with unprocessed emotional trauma, the chakras literally start to close, or the energy flowing through our body really starts to slow down. Being in California, it's a good example to use the 405 during rush hour. Literally nothing's moving. If we can open up the 405 or our energy channels, it becomes more efficient. You're able to get where you're going in a lot more efficient. You have less anxiety and all of that because the traffic is not there. Our body is the same exact way. If we can get these chakras to work at a higher level more efficiently, the energy is channeling through the body more efficiently, we have a lot better opportunity to protect ourselves, right? If our body is wore down, it's a lot harder to protect ourselves, right? So there's a lot of practice of building up your energy shield, as some may call it. And there's a lot of very specific different practices, which, could go off on a tangent for hours on those. But nonetheless, it's taking care of your vehicle, taking care of your energy systems. And what is also linked to that is the mental aspect of that, right? If we have a lot of, challenging thoughts, negative, quote unquote, thoughts running through our mind, we're really putting that energy out there. And that can also cause the body to struggle with its protection and or just operating at a more efficient, kind of standpoint.
Absolutely. It's very well said. There's so many variables involved, and there's so many different modalities that people can execute on to not only heal what they're going through now, but preventing future things in the future. So yeah, I love how you put that. Now, let me ask you this question. Tell us a little bit how you've gone from, physical therapists, Western education, Western medicine trained to this Ayurvedic, and I don't know if that is the right word here, but more holistic Eastern medicine, spirituality, natural healing, because, physical therapists are people who help people that have just, and correct me if I'm wrong, just had surgery, just went under the knife, big pharma or the doctors told them, hey, we got to cut you up. we got to repair your ACL. This is the only option you have. And we know there's other options here. We know there's
Right.
other options here
Yep.
because getting surgery is not the only option we have. But tell us a little bit more about your story, about what and how you connected your Western education to now your Eastern philosophy.
Yeah, and that again, a great question. I get asked that a lot, and it really doesn't have anything to say negatively about Western medicine. I think let me make this clear that Western medicine absolutely has its place. We've done a lot of great things in the medical field for helping people. However, with that on that same note, I do feel that the Western medicine take on things is a retroactive approach and is often managing symptoms versus actually getting to the core of issues. And so as I went through my schooling at Central Michigan, USC, University of Cincinnati, did a sports fellowship, I really got some of the best knowledge in the country and the Western side of things when it comes to physical therapy and sports athletes more specifically. And as I started practicing at a facility very well known in Orange County, California, I started to realize that I had a big void that was missing when it came to treating the entire individual. And from the very beginning, I knew that I wanted to be a practitioner that takes the entire person in consideration when helping them with their injuries. If you have a torn ACL, it's not just that you are a patient with a torn ACL. No, you're an entire individual that has this injury going on that is affecting you as an entire individual. And so as I got, a couple of years into practicing, I really noticed that, man, there's a big part of the mental side of things and this kind of unspoken energy, spiritual side of things as well. And so when I started my company in 2015, it was literally like a light bulb went off in my head that I needed to do more as far as my education. And at that time, I really started to seek some of the areas and in some cases nationally and internationally best people in Eastern medicine. I really was pushed and drawn to the energy spiritual side of things. And through that, I studied a lot of ancient cultures from all over the world and realized at the core of their civilizations, there was a lot of energy work discussed, whether it was from a healing standpoint or whether it was just from a overall wellness standpoint. And that went off on various different tangents from discussing sound healing, so like frequency stuff to art, to music. All of these things were incorporated into their cultures because it was a way that they got a lot of satisfaction out of living, and when it was needed, also they healed a lot of their issues from these different practices. And so, as I went down that path, I started, working with a lot of different people, getting to understand some of these different treatments. Again, whether it's Reiki, sound bowl healing, meditation, breath work, inner child work. I started to see the results myself, and it really, I want to say change me as a person, but ultimately I think it connected me to who I am as a person.
Mm.
And through that, I started to learn more about it. And then I went on, a path of seeking this information and learning it. And like I mentioned, studying ancient civilizations and traveling all over the world and seeing some of these different techniques being used. And I then started incorporating that into my practice here in Orange County at Repair Sports Institute. And I've seen the results firsthand with myself and again with my patients, and have been very excited and very happy with those results. And I continue to learn more and implement more into our daily practice here.
Amazing. And, so one thing I admire about you is your humility, right? You're still in the beginning stages. You're still, even though you are so experienced and you have all the credentials and you've invested a ton of time, energy, and attention and money into your own personal growth, which I admire so much. And I think that was one of the things that you and I really had in common is the humility aspect that, we are still learning. We are still growing. We are still challenging ourselves. And the best way to learn is to teach. And that's some of the things that you're really embodying right now as a leader in your industry. And to all the people that are listening, for all the people that are listening, to really put it in layman terms and to keep this as simple as possible. what are some small action steps that they can take today to connect, to bridge that gap between Western medicine and Eastern medicine? Some micro tasks that they can execute on that you think would be really beneficial to anybody listening to this podcast today?
Yeah, that again, another great question. There's a lot of different things, and I've touched on several of those different things, but more from a conceptual standpoint. It's a mindset, really. Understanding that in this world we operate with a conscious mind most of the time, and I think most people can relate to that conscious mind often drifts. Very seldomly are we in the present, being aware, living in the moment, as a lot of people say. And what that means is that then directs people more thinking about the future and or living in the past. What happens when we're often living in the future or living in the past is, one, living in the future, we often come from a place of fear, right? What is tomorrow going to bring? Am I still going to have this job? Am I still going to be in this relationship? Or living in the past, which could be regret, resentment, upset with yourself from decisions that you made. And when you're living in those two different realms, it causes a lot of emotion. And when it's causing these emotions, we often then live in those emotions and we identify with those emotions and we act out based on those emotions. When we're able to subconsciously connect our conscious mind, so our consciousness to our subconscious, and which is more of our inner self, not to go too deep on it, we're more in alignment, and that allows us to live more in the moment, be more aware of our surroundings, be more
Right.
present. And
Right.
when we're able to do that, we're able to live and act out in less of a place of emotion. Yeah, sure, we still have emotions. Emotions are great. We need to have those emotions. Those emotions a lot of times protect us, or they keep us happy, or we have sadness. Those are all appropriate, and we should allow those emotions to be processed and to happen. But when we don't allow those emotions to happen or we don't process them, we bury them deep inside, right? And that's where we often then, because of those unprocessed emotions, we live in the past or live in the future. So going back to some of the things I mentioned previously, the meditation, the Reiki, the breath work,
Yeah.
those are tools to use to live more in the moment.
Right. To
Those
be more
tools
present.
allow us to process those emotions actively or reactively, and to clear those emotions out of our body to then be more focused on the present. And again, when we talked about earlier protecting ourselves, um, and or being more connected, when we process those emotions as they should be, we don't hang on to them. That allows our chakra system to be more opened up. That allows our meridians to flow more smoothly, and again, therefore, be more present and not coming from a place of emotion.
Amazing. So the two things I got from that is consistently being present
Yeah.
and doing deep emotional work. And
Yeah.
it's very ironic that they both go hand in hand and they come full
Yes.
circle, because you ended that so perfectly in the sense that, when you're more present, you're going to act less based on emotion, and when you're
Yep.
acting less based on emotion, you're going to be more present. So
Absolutely.
it's like this full circle. And there's a ton of modalities that you could use to be more present, whether it's the breath work. I personally, and I know you would agree, meditation is so important
Yep.
to not only practice consciously dropping into the present moment, but also being more of aware of your thoughts, because your thoughts
Yep.
create those emotions. So,
Yeah.
one thing that I talk about all the time, and actually, great opportunity for me to mention, you guys, I just dropped a 100-day meditation challenge on the Life Coach Zach app. So go ahead to lifecoachzach.app and get started on that 100-day meditation challenge. I take you through
Love it.
ton of different ways on how you can learn how to meditate, and it will hold you accountable and keep you consistent to a daily meditation practice. So Chad, I want to transition the conversation to a little bit of things that you've shared with me, with your transparency, your vulnerability,
Yep.
when it comes to having your identity and acting based off of a certain identity that your ego might hold into your mind or your heart. And I know that your story is very interesting as an athlete, and I believe you had the injuries, transitioned from that, leveraged all your knowledge and your experience into entrepreneurship, creating your own business as a doctor in physical therapy. Tell us a little bit about your backstory. Tell us a little bit about mainly how your identity was impacted and how you use that to get a little better along this journey yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So identity is something that is extremely important for this work, and as a society, it is completely normal for someone to come up to you and be like, "So Zach, who are you?" And most people will go, "Well, I'm 30 plus years old. I live in Florida. I am a life coach, so on and so forth." And those are all, yes, those are characteristics of you, but it's who are you, right? And my story goes to, I grew up cornfield, middle of nowhere, Michigan. I was good at sports, and I solely identified as an athlete. And there's nothing wrong with being an athlete and having that identity. However, that's ultimately not who I am. And I'll touch on why that can be cause some issues in people's lives when they so closely attach to an identity. So when I go off to college, played college football for a very short period of time because of injuries. I was no longer able to. And so I was no longer an athlete. So now I'm in undergrad, for the first time on my own. I'm no longer this identity that I associated myself with for so long. And that can cause a lot of turmoil. And a lot of times people are not sure then who they are. And it goes back to, touching in with your inner self, like truly who is, Dr. Chad, who is Zach, and doing the inner work to figure out, am I a good person? Am I a trustworthy person? Am I a loving person? Am I a charismatic person? And I'm not just an athlete. Sure, I like to play sports. Sure, in some cases, maybe you're good at sports. That is completely fine. But when the ego or your entire self attaches to an identity solely, that can cause a lot of issues. And when those are taken away, that can really cause a lot of issues. And then people are really lost and not sure which way to go. So it really just tries to, touching on identity just a little bit, it really goes back to making sure that you're putting in the work to figure out who am I, and again using the different tools to touch base with who you are, and ultimately not coming from and operating out of a place of emotion, coming from a connected version of who you are, so your real attributes can be played out in your everyday life.
Dr. Chad, your story is very similar to my story. I was on Big Brother, came off the show with a lot of followers, people paying me for meet and greets, appearances, articles being written about me, and I identified as that person. Zach Rance from Big Brother 16, funny, young, good looking, smart, yada, yada, yada. But then when the next season came around, no one cared about Zach Rance from Big Brother anymore. And
Yeah.
my identity was like stolen from my heart. So, what are some things that people can do to make sure that they're identifying with who they are, not who their ego says they are?
Yeah, that's a good one right there. I mean, again, it's from connecting with you, who you are on a deep sense, and ultimately that first takes figuring out who you are on a deep sense, right? Like being often people are distracted. They may travel a lot, and that's no bag on traveling, or they may work a lot. Nothing wrong with working a lot unless it's not being a good balance with your life. But often people will overstimulate themselves because they're not necessarily happy with
Right.
who they are as an individual inside. And that goes back to what people often do is attach themselves with this identity, this external identity as a business owner, as a reality TV star, or as an athlete, and that becomes unstable. And that's not ultimately who they are. So different again, tools, how can you avoid doing that? The biggest one is really putting in the time and the effort to figure out who you are. And a retreat that I've done in Costa Rica, that was the first part of the entire retreat, was asking, show me who I am. And the premise of that is taking a moment, checking in. Who are you? Am I a trustworthy person? Am I a loving person? Is there things that I could get better at? Sitting in that humility and truly figuring out who you are is first and foremost. And that can take a while, and it's not necessarily easy, because
Yeah.
you really have to sit down with yourself and figure those things out. But that ultimately is the first step of this
Hmm.
process. If you're not willing to sit and figure out who I am, and then who you want to be, the next part of that, it's really challenging to not attach yourself to an identity.
Right. There's so many levels to this, because the person can do and will do everything you said about asking yourself those questions. Who am I? What are my personality traits? What can I get better at? What am I doing wrong? Like, what are some of, my negative habits, yada, yada, yada. But
Yep.
most people, and we know this, Dr. Chad, most people aren't honest with themselves.
Right.
Most people lie to themselves, and not to pivot the conversation in that sense, but there are so many. I want to make sure that the audience is getting as much value from this conversation as possible. So that for the people that are listening on Apple, Spotify, Audible, and to the people that are watching on YouTube, first of all, thank you so much for giving me your attention and sticking around towards the end of this podcast. But the first question is really asking yourself, like Dr. Chad said, who are you as a person? Not what you do, not how old you are, not the skills you have, because we all know we can sharpen skills, we can learn new things. Who are you as a person? What do you care about? What are you bringing? What energy, are you surrounding yourself with? And then being honest with yourself, because we all have weaknesses, right?
Mhm.
So can you piggyback off of that a little bit, Dr. Chad?
Yeah. So again, sitting down with yourself and identifying and really truly listening to your inner self, your inner child, and it's not running away from what your ego tells you. I hear that a fair amount is not listening to your ego, blocking out negative thoughts, and we've talked about this before. It's not necessarily the blocking out the negative thoughts or blocking out your ego. It's not letting your ego or those negative thoughts run the vehicle, right? The ego is an important, very important, tool that we've been gifted to help protect us. And over the years, thousands of years, it's allowed us to survive. But what in the more modern times, the ego tends to want to drive the vehicle, and that's when we get into some challenging places. So to reiterate is not to block out or shame the ego. It's more to listen to the ego, get along with the ego, but at the same time, let the ego know you are not driving this vehicle. You are in
Right.
the back seat, and I
Uh-huh.
greatly appreciate the information that you're giving me, but you're not driving the boat. You're not
Uh-huh.
driving the car. And
Right.
when you're able to, again, sit down with yourself, identify who you are, appreciate and listen to the ego, but not allow them to drive the car, you will be in a lot better position in order to be in the moment and
Yep.
not operate from a place of emotion.
Yep, you're absolutely right, because that ego's never going away.
No.
Your ego's going to want to crave more. Your ego's wants to judge other things or judge other people. Your ego wants to identify with your property or your clothes or your car or your likes and followers on Instagram. It's always going to be there. But just like you said, acknowledging the ego, having a conversation with that ego, keeping that ego in check. The ego is not driving this car. You are driving this car, and really keeping that in check. So what's an action step that people that are listening can take to make sure they're keeping their ego in check? Because I need to hear this too, man.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a good one. And first and foremost is building a relationship with your ego, realizing that that inner voice in your head is ultimately not who you are. That inner voice are thoughts. It could be emotions. It could be protection. It could be a fear factor. And one, identifying those thoughts, that's what they are, that it is the ego talking, it's not ultimately who you are, starts to build a relationship with the ego. And from building a relationship, you can then better understand why your ego speaks up when it does. Maybe when it's a bit too quiet, why is it too quiet? And then from there, you can start to have more of a symbiotic relationship. And I don't like to use the word control, but really it does come down to being able to control the ego, to not, again, allow it to be driving the car, more of a warning signal, or thanks for that information kind of side note, versus it being the ruler of your vehicle. And so it really starts with developing a relationship, and ultimately that can happen through meditation. When you're sitting in meditation trying to calm the mind, if the mind is just going off in different directions, typically that is the ego. It's trying to think about the future and run with fear, or it's trying to think about the past and have regrets. And at that point in time, it really can be, and I personally do it vocally, because I think that has a little bit more of an effect. But talking to your ego and be like, well, thank you for those thoughts of the future, or thank you for those thoughts of the past, but right now I want to sit in the moment, and those thoughts or emotions do not serve me. And I greatly appreciate for that information, but right now I'm going to sit in peace and thank you. And I'm grateful for those thoughts. But right now, this is what we're doing. And in most cases, boom, it shuts off. Now, especially if you're doing it at the beginning and you're first developing a relationship, it can come right back. But if you are in that cycle of building that relationship and having those conversations, you will, in a short period of time, really, it's a consistent practice, but in a short period of time, you can start having better control of those thoughts and ultimately your ego.
Absolutely. That's exactly. And, I would frame that, everything you said, I wouldn't change a thing, but that's just conscious, like being conscious, like seeing your ego, talking to your ego, being able to exercise your free will to do the opposite of what your ego says, if that's what, your choice and action aligns with your value is called for you to do. But Dr. Chad, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to hop on the podcast today. This was nothing short of a great pleasure, a good friend, and I love catching up. To all the people that were listening on Apple, Spotify, Audible, or watching on YouTube, thank you so much for listening and watching. Head over to lifecoachzach.com for all media, more videos, and all the things like that. Dr. Chad, thank you so much, my man.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on, Zach. And for anyone that's interested in a little bit more about what we do too, on Instagram, we're Repair Sports. We put out, regular information, and we're happy to help you guys. But definitely thank you for having me on, Zach. It was a great pleasure of mine as well.
Absolutely. And to all the people on YouTube, I'm going to drop the URL to Dr. Chad's website and all the places that you can find him. So no worries on that. Dr. Chad, look forward to talking again soon.
Yes, sir.
What's up, guys? Are you looking to work with me as your life coach without spending all the money? Well, I have a perfect product and service for you. The Life Coach Zach app. I recently launched the Life Coach Zach app earlier this year, and it has a ton of resources and services that are perfect for you, including, but not limited to, guided affirmations, guided meditations, exclusive podcasts, and mindfulness exercises for you to live your best life. Head over to lifecoachzach.app and download the app today.